You reminded me, Bruce, of something before we went on the air with last week's program that I just as soon forget, but you might want to tell some of the story of our lunch in 1996, our lunch in Phoenix with the Ultimate Warrior.
Wow. Well, see, I brought that up because I wanted to hear you tell the story on the way to WrestleMania 12, wherein the Ultimate Warrior was making his return to the WWF. We all had to make a pit stop in Phoenix, Arizona to have lunch and to go by and see the Ultimate Warrior's wrestling school. I can't even say it with a straight face. To go by and see his gym and his wrestling school, and to talk to Jim about his ideas for the Ultimate Warrior and what he saw going forward and what have you. And it turned into an extremely entertaining day and lunch where we learned all about this thing that he had come up with that was it destruity or dextrosity?
No, it was destruity. And let me say this also. You knew the Warrior because you had been there. I'd never met the This was 1996. I'd always been down south. He'd been up north, and he'd been out of the business for a couple of years. I didn't know him, never met him. I never was a fan because I thought his matches were the shit, second only to his shitty promos. And I've always looked at him as the male version of Sable. Basically, he got pushed because of the way he looked, and Vince was into that type of thing. And the white cotton panties.
He had charisma.
The two Vinces would talk about Sable. The white charisma. You couldn't look away. It was like two dogs fucking on the side of the road. I don't know if that's charisma, but anyway, I didn't like to fly even back then. And I found out not only are we flying all the way from New York to LA for WrestleMania, but we got to stop. We got to land and take off a second time in Phoenix to have lunch with this fucking clown. And I don't mean to be speaking ill of the dead, but I'm going to speak ill of him, and he's dead, so I guess I am. But I've never also understood why that somebody immediately becomes a great person when they die, when everybody motherfucked them when they were alive. And Bobby Heenan told me the story of how Warrior broke his neck with a clothesline from behind and never even apologized. So he was on my shit list because I love me some Bobby Heenan. But destruity, what was it? I've tried to tune that out, but I'm sitting there. I knew they were English words coming out of this fucking guy's mouth because I knew they were English, but I'd never heard them put in that order before. He was a raving lunatic living on the planet Zambodia. And destruity was something like destiny, truth, and elasticity. What was it? I don't fucking know.
I don't remember. Every letter had a meaning. D is for identity, and E is for extreme, and S is for satisfaction. It's like E is for the energy she gives us. I don't know. But every letter had like a word to it. And that's for this, and that's for this, and every other word was fuck and goddamn and shit. And Linda McMahon is sitting there, and that's
right. Linda was with us too, wasn't she?
Yeah, and us good old Southern boys.
Even I didn't talk like that around Linda McMahon.
Well, nobody did. We have respect for women, and we have respect for, come on. And it was an uncomfortable, strange day, but for me, the funniest part of all was when we leave and pretty much everybody was just dying to get the Jim Cornette perspective on, well, Jimmy, what do you think?
And I was like, what the fuck? What the fuck is this guy fucking raving about? What the fuck? You all had all
It's destruity, pal.
You all had some primer, some warm up to this. The only time that I had ever actually seen the Ultimate Warrior in person, and I'll tell you this, now that I think about it, I'd seen him one other time in person, was 1985 Christmas time. I came home from, we were in Charlotte at that point, just had started working for Crockett, and I came home to Louisville, and I went down to the matches on Tuesday night to say hello to Christine Jarrett and some of the boys. And the third match on the card was going to come up. And all of a sudden, I noticed the entire locker room on both sides emptied, and the heels went out to their the end of the bleachers that were blocked off in the very far end of the building on one side, and the baby faces went out the other side. I thought, my God, what is this going to be? A hell of a match. And it was Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee against these two guys called the Blade Runners. Rather, it was Rock and Sting at that point, but it was Warrior and Sting. And I asked, because I was sitting over on the heel side, because people still knew me as a heel there, and I asked whoever.
I'm a heel.
Well, goddamn it. I said, are these guys really that good? And then when I looked at them, they were more jacked up than the national audience ever saw them. Sting was as big as Warrior practically was when he was in the WWF, and Warrior was so big, he looked like a cartoon. I couldn't believe that somebody looked like this, right? I said, are these guys any good? The curtain is sold out. Everybody on the card is watching this. And they said, just watch. I have never, in 45 years of watching wrestling, seen two guys that Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee couldn't have a match with. But I saw it that night. And they had to go 30 minutes Broadway because Jarrett was trying to get somebody to teach these guys, and Sting finally got it. And I'm not knocking Sting. He finally got it. Warrior never did, never wanted to, I don't think. He thought he knew better. He's the one who didn't want to sell for Bill Watts. Bill Watts owned the fucking territory. But 30-minute Broadway, because they were trying to give them on-the-job training. And that was, at one point, Lawler and Dundee were just looking at each other, and they started doing the shit they'd already done 10 minutes ago because they couldn't think of anything else to try to do with these guys. It was amazing. And then to flash forward 11 years to 1996, and Vince McMahon makes me go sit across from this right-wing crackpot, anti-gay of fucking the epitome of everything that I hated about WWF wrestling in the 80s. And I've got to listen to him talk about fucking destruity. And then it was 6 weeks later that Warrior got mad because of his logo being put on the booth at the trade show, and wanted Vince to buy 3 million of his comic books at $1 a piece to make it even. And Vince said, "How about just fucking go home?" And that was,
God.
But at least the one good thing.
And then I had to get on a death tube, a tube of death, and go to California.
But the one good thing was about the Warrior coming back is at least he flattened the son-in-law in 1 minute before he was the son-in-law, before he left. But my God, how did y'all fucking deal with that guy on a regular basis back in the 80s?
Was there a point where things changed? I mean, obviously in '89, he was getting that huge push for he was the Intercontinental Champion, building up to the match with Hogan. Did anything change after he got the title?
In what way?
Was he one guy on the way up, and then did he become a different guy? Did he get more crazed? Did he get more into his destruity and his mythos after he became champion? In other words,
the destruity was something new.
Did he lull you into a false sense of security by being a person who did what he was told and wasn't a pain in the ass, and suddenly got pushed into a main event position and was a royal pain in the ass?
Right.
No, not really. He was, but I will, no. I'll say this. He was a different person to Vince than he was to everybody else.
Okay. One of those.
He was all, roses and sunshine to Vince, and just rotten to everybody else. Well, so that was probably, Vince only saw what he saw.